All right. Hello, friends. Today is June 16th. Welcome to lesson number 28, where Ruth and I are going to be covering the topic of relationships, which is, I think, a term everyone's heard of, but I know for myself, I never really took the time to really unpack what is a relationship, how does it affect health, and there's a lot of nuance there. So thank you for being here. Thank you for making a commitment to taking responsibility for your health. Our objective today is to sort of expand perspective on the topic of relationship in terms of how broadly that applies, how deeply we can think of our relationships, and for Ruth and I to just sort of share our understanding of how we think of relationships, what we've learned over time, and kind of share some stories. And so this by no means is us saying we understand completely what relationships are, but more so just to stimulate a conversation that hopefully stimulates a bit of curiosity for people to undergo a deeper inquiry into, what is a relationship? How do I relate to that word? And maybe examining our individual relationships. So if you have questions about the lesson, as always, feel free to message us on Slack or to create a community discussion around the topic. And yeah, let's dig in and maybe start by just introducing the topic. So Ruth, when someone says relationships, what comes to mind?
Well, initially, the way I used to think relationships come to mind are like all the, like how do I interact with the people in my life? But more recently, since going through the Foot Nerd program, I look at everything through the SAID principle, like our first principle of specific adaptation to impose demands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I'm a relationship. I always thought I was like really a relationship kind of person, but thinking on this now, and lots of life experiences, my definition when we were taking the notes is this: feedback loops based on inputs and outputs between humans and the world around us,
Ooh.
or the beings in the world around us, which was like pretty scientific
Mm.
in a certain way. But I think it's been so helpful for me personally to look at it that way, that if we look at relationships based on our first principles, then you could see every human, every being, every object that you interact with as inputs and outputs.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot to chew on there. I mean, I think, like I've always used the word relationship in my vocabulary, and usually that brings to mind like the relationship I have with people in my family, or a relationship with a partner, like an intimate relationship. But I've sort of started to take a much broader sort of use of the word relationship, right? Because I've said this before, right? We have a relationship with technology, with our phones. We have a relationship with food, with drugs. So really, relationship means anything that we're sort of connected with, anything we engage with, and that makes it a much broader topic to unpack. And I think I think relationships is sort of like probably best put as a subtopic of community, right?
Right.
And even in the community lesson, we talked about how, okay, if we have like these rings of proximity in terms of our community, we have our own community, which is ourselves, right? Like all the cells in our body, all the organisms that inhabit this body that we live in. And I think fundamentally, health really is, and even the Foot Nerd experience, it's all about building a better relationship with ourselves, right? Which is really kind of what health is, right? Like the relationship we have with our body, with our minds. This whole idea that health is really our own intimate relationship, spiritually, physically, and mentally, with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to have better relationships with the world, with other things in the world, we need to start with a better relationship with ourselves, and sort of examine, like, what does that even mean? And we're not claiming to have the answers, but hopefully we can help stimulate better questions so that people can seek their own answers.
Nick, so like when you were saying better relationship with ourselves, so I'm a big advocate for like governing the cells in our body, right? So like if we think in the community lesson, we talked about our bodies being collections of cells in neighborhoods, if you will, that make up tissues and organs, et cetera. So it almost sounded like you were saying like relationship with ourselves.
That's true.
And I love, no, but I love that though, because it's not esoteric really. It's like, well, when you talk about creating a relationship of health with yourself, um, you are taking inputs, like we are like feeling devices. So we are computing devices, like the most sophisticated computers. And so we're designed to receive inputs, and then our actual little cells, our little mini me's respond to that with output. And I love Esther Perel, because she talks about, can I just start with this one quote to get
Yeah,
us
please do.
off? Because she says, so like when we talk about like relationships to the self, we usually think about our relationship to the world around us like we have to know ourselves, or like in the Footnerd program, we talk about the science of like self-awareness, right? That's how we navigate our health. We have to become like radically self-aware and self-regulatory in a certain way. But I love how she talks about this. It kind of stimulated some thought experiments, because she talks about how we think that we need to love ourselves first, or have a good relationship with the self first, before we can go into have healthy relationships with other people and the world around us. But she takes the approach that the only way that we know ourselves, or from our perspective as footnerds, become self-aware, is through interactions with others. So she says, the way I speak is influenced by the way you listen. The way I see myself is influenced by the way you see me. We are not just like one thing. We're not one person. We may have like a core set of characteristics, she says, but we are shaped by the relationships in which we are. We make the relationship, and the relationship makes us. And so I think that is good evidence about like the sense principle. Like you can only, I like to think about like relationships as the way that we could look at food. Like you could subsist on Doritos and French fries for a period of time, but that wouldn't make for a healthy life in the long run. You wouldn't feel good. And I think the same is true for relationships, right? So like you could subsist on the comforts of modern conveniences, being isolated with your phone, your computer, your Netflix, and your personalized playlist, where you don't have to tolerate anything or anyone outside of your own interests and your own comfort and convenience. But over the long haul, that makes for a very unhealthy or unsatisfying one-dimensional lifestyle that isn't going to really feed you in the long run. So that we need a diverse amount of relational nutrients, in the same way that in order to live a healthy life, in the same way that we need a super diverse variety of foods in order to create good, strong cells. So that was what I was thinking about in relationship to our cells.
I like that. It almost seems like technology, our kind of quest to always advance technology, has actually left us what we feel is like we're hyper connected, right? But I think the word connected is not a human connection. It's a technological connection, which I think needs to be parsed. And it's almost like technology allowing us to be hyper connected to everything in the world at all times has left us relationally undernourished. Right. And it's almost like me using my phone to have a relationship with you by texting you tricks me into thinking we're connecting. But really, the only thing I have a relationship with there is my phone.
Yeah.
And my phone has a relationship to you, but that's not a direct, it's like this weird thing where we're more hyper connected than ever, but we feel more alone than ever.
Yeah.
And so what is the mechanism there? And I think it's just poverty of true human relationships with other people, with the natural world, right? Like if you expand relationship beyond the human to human interface, we have a relationship with nature. Um, like when I go to Forest One and I fill all the bird feeders, I'm sort of nourishing my relationship with the birds around there, right? And when I observe them, I'm deepening my relationship with the birds. And, you know, I think it really is, relationships boil down to how much energy are you putting into these things, right? It's almost like sending you a text message is like a super low energy excuse to think that I'm connecting with you, when in reality it's kind of like junk food, right? You eat a Big Mac and you trick your body into thinking you're getting some stuff, but you're really not getting any of the true substance that actually nourishes your body. And so we end up
Yeah.
being overfed and undernourished. And I think with technology, we end up being hyper digitally connected, but undernourished in our actual relational nutrients that we need to live like pleasant, healthy human lives.
Yeah. And you can, and then I think like about the idea of technology and tricking ourselves, right? Because it's the convenience of the comfort. So we get tricked because we don't get so it reminds me of like cold exposure or heat exposure, right? Like you don't get faced with your limitations. So there's something about cultivating curiosity, which I was like, well, when we're like super hyper isolated with the comforts and the convenience of all the things that we have innovatively like created for ourselves, door to everybody gets their individualized food, everybody gets everything that they individually need, so that we're never really exposed to discomforts that we have to sit through in order to be faced with our limitations, so that like you don't get like cold exposure in relationships, right? Like you don't have those awkward moments of meeting somebody in the library that you find attractive and then having to negotiate the actual feelings in our body in order
Mm.
to overcome certain fears, in order to like take a risk. So like I was thinking about risk tolerance and cultivating curiosity and like facing our limitations, like without purposefully putting ourselves into situations where we can be around, I would even argue, public spaces where there's lots of variety of people that are like non-commodified spaces, like parks or museums or something where it's like not a space where all you're there to do is consume and buy things, or where you can, maybe a music festival or something where like you're around such a diversity of humans that you are exposed to like or maybe in a new neighborhood where people aren't maybe go to the Italian neighborhood where they don't speak English, in that, and you get to see who you are in, like Esther Perel talks about, we're not just one thing. I am to my babe, I am somebody different to my nephews who are like little baby blobs of human flesh that are helpless, and I hold them. I'm somebody different to them than I am to my 9-year-old nephew, or I'm somebody different in relationship to the 80-year-old neighbor who sees me as a child, or my parents who see me as a child, whereas my partner sees me as something fantastically sexy, or like whatever
Right.
it is, like but we don't get that exposure. So like you're talking about like one person, one text, like you don't get those inputs of like how you're faced with certain limitations that stimulate natural curiosity. So as an example, I told you about the Tampa Bladers, where Matthew and I were out rollerblading in the public place, and we were on a street. We're middle-aged people and we're blading around, and some people saw us as like real inspirations, like, oh, a guy rode by on a bike and he's like, I gotta get me a pair of those. So we were somebody different to him, some kind of like cool ass rollerbladers. And then the young person's group, who were the Tampa Bladers, who were like probably teenagers into their early 20s, come zooming in, asking us if we're part of the Tampa Bladers, and we didn't understand what that was, but they were like so light on their feet and buzzing all around. I didn't really understand the lingo that they were using and stuff, but they invited us to come along. And then we were somebody different in that space of public appearance to that group of people. So like the inputs, like it's just so rich, the more inputs that we can give ourselves relationally, I guess. And then the text and the computers don't do anything to show us our limitations. They do very small amounts to show us like our true limitations. And then only when we're faced with our true limitations of discomfort, like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or I can't believe I said that, or oh my God, I said that, or like, wow, I responded fantastically to that. Or like going with those Tampa bladers, I stretched my comfort zone because I went down the hill faster than I would have really been comfortable doing, but I did it. And then I increased my risk tolerance. And so you keep expanding by the inputs of discomfort. And then you become more naturally curious, because curiosity is a practice that has to be cultivated by putting yourself in maybe uncomfortable situations.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I really like the point you made about how we are different people based on different relational contexts, despite us feeling like we're the same person, right? Like you're Ruth, but also you're like Ruth 1 with someone, you're Ruth 2 with someone else. And so, I think part of relationship is the ability to adapt to each unique relationship. And the more relationships you have, the more adaptable you become, because the more you have to stretch your ability to actually match and mirror that interaction or that person or that thing. Mm-hmm. As you were talking there, I kind of, on that tangent of technology, this idea that relationships that were essential for like ancestrally have now sort of become optional. And just because the option is there, and we can, like, for example, I'll give a contextual example. We used to have a relationship with food. We used to have to go out and like hunt food or gather food or grow food. But now all we have to do, it's like all those diverse relationships that we would have had with people in our tribe that we hunted with. There's like a contextual hunting pack relationship there. The relationship we would have had to have had with the environment to know what is safe to eat, what is not, when can we grow certain things, when do certain things grow. Huge pool of relationships that we ancestrally had to have. Now the only relationship we need to have is with our grocery store. And so we've eliminated, we've concentrated all those former food relationships, which were broad and diverse, and probably that taught us many things in context of each of those relationships. We've now condensed it and concentrated it down through technology and through modern civilization to a single, superficial, low bandwidth relationship with a store that we go and get everything we need without any understanding of how those things came to be there. So,
and to take that a step, and what about taking that a step further, where like, I live in a condo complex and people they don't even go to the grocery store. They have their groceries delivered.
There you go.
Especially older people, right? Like that.
So you've eliminated those relationships. You no longer have those.
Exactly. Yeah. So even that, like we're becoming, I can't tell you how many doors I've opened for people delivering somebody's groceries, that then get left at the door and they just knock and go.
So it's almost like that's a big source of, like as like a really zoomed out mental model, I kind of think of health as being healthy means being connected to this distributed health network, which is life, right? Nature, community. That is like, the more connections you have, the richer your health will be. And the less connections you have, the more disconnected you are, the less health you have.
Yeah.
So it almost seems like relationship is literally underlies everything related to health, because the more disconnected we are, the less health we have. And health comes through health comes from a diversity and a richness of relationships, right? Like diversity meaning many relationships, and richness meaning the depth of the relationships we have with each of those points. I'm not even looking at my notes because I realize the notes are useless, and this is actually a better conversation.
But Nikki Pop, I don't know if we talked about this in the community lesson about Lissa Rankin wrote a book called Mind Over Medicine. Did we talk about that longitudinal study that they did?
No, I don't think so.
I'm probably going to get some of this wrong, but just take it as the big picture paraphrase, which is that there was a longitudinal study done with like first generation Italian immigrants that moved to the East Coast as like a large community. So the findings of the longitudinal study was that the community relationships and the familial relationships were a bigger risk factor in health than like the biggest risk factors like smoking, heart disease, obesity, whatever the other risk factors are. And what they did was they followed this community, I think over like a 20-year period since they moved. And what happened was, because they all came as like a community to find a better, more modern, convenient, wealthier life, the researchers, I think, I don't exactly know how they did this, but they followed the community, which were like wine swilling, cheese eating, pasta eating, obese, smoked, drank, like did all the things that you would think that would make them sick. But the older generations were only dying of natural causes. And they boiled the study down to that this community were intergenerationally dependent and interdependent, like all the kids, all the babies were growing up with the teenagers, with the aunts and the uncles, were with extended family, were with their neighbors, the doors were open, the churches were open, the family grocery stores, like they were in that neighborhood, and they were all overlapping into the space of public appearances and their relationships with each other. So that what they followed over this period is that only when the younger generations went to college, left the home, started to move into like nuclear families where they weren't in those multi-generational, communal, varietal relationship, nutrients weren't there, only then did they start developing diseases of affluence. And that up until that point, so that the conclusion of that particular story, or that particular study / story, is that how important those relationships are, and that they are as important as those other risk factors. And I think that's probably true from my own personal experience. I've gone through periods in my life where I feel so much better as a lone wolf. I've always kind of described myself a little bit as, I've been estranged from my family, and it's so much easier. But you know me personally, and the things that I've done to try to cultivate like these relationships where it's like, it's not easy. But
it's a lot of work.
So like and another thing that Lissa Rankin did in her study, she's a medical doctor in Palo Alto, I think. So she was talking about how she moved her practice to like the most prestigious, rich place where all of her patients were like super healthy. They had access to every possible green drink, all the food, all the great fitness tools, like everything that they could possibly need and want to be healthy in the way of like tools were at their disposal because of how wealthy the community was. Mm-hmm. And she reported that her patient group were the sickest of any she had seen in anywhere she had ever practiced. And she couldn't understand why. And so she changed her medical intake form. Instead of asking the typical general medical history questions, she started asking things like, well, why do you think you feel so bad? Or why do you think you're dealing with this illness? And she said she was surprised at the kind of answers that she was getting. Like, she thought she would get answers like, well, I think I'm low in vitamin D, or, she thought there would be like they would be able to give her some insights into their own health, but they were saying things like, well, I really have been needing to leave this marriage, and I haven't been able to do it. Or I have a book that I've been wanting to write for 20 years, and I can't bring myself to do it. So it started to become more about lifestyle and relationship and community issues, more so than like these other factors, like these medical factors. And I thought that was really interesting. And what I wanted to say from personal experience is that I kind of fall into that category. Like, over the last 20 years, my 6-pillar health is stellar. I actually consider myself to be a really good community member, but the truth is that I've done all that in isolation and not really exposing myself to a lot of risk, because it's really uncomfortable and it makes me feel sometimes like I don't like people very much. But I realize that my risk tolerance is low. Mark Manson talks about one of the biggest characteristics or practice that you can have is risk tolerance. And that is exposing yourself purposefully to things that make you uncomfortable in order to deal with the shitty parts of your personality. And so like, to me, I was like, well, all my relationships are unhealthy. That's why I'm leaving all you MFers. And then I was like, wait a second, the common denominator here is me. Like, I don't know how to actually negotiate these relationships. So more recently, I have like purposefully put myself into positions with family members where I am having to practice, and it's better. And I go to places that make me uncomfortable and I try. And I'm learning so much about myself, and I feel healthier now. Like, all the other pillars start to come together when my relationships are more diverse, and when I have to practice sitting through discomfort or learning somebody's communication style. We all speak, we're all speaking maybe a similar language, but we're not really communicating very well because we don't really know what makes we don't listen sometimes to know what makes the other person tick or communicate well, or we're not playing, fair or communicating fairly. So
Yeah, it's almost like being in a relationship is like a game, right? Each relationship is its own mini game that you have with someone or something. And the less you play that game, the more out of practice you get. And the less likely you want to engage in that because you're like, oh, I'm so out of practice. Like, I just can't. It's too intimidating, or it's too hard, or it's just not something I want to do. But at some point you have to start practicing again, right?
mhm.
And you have to find someone to practice with who's willing to practice. And I think the biggest thing with relationships is, like, when it comes to human relationships, they are a lot of work because you're dealing with someone else who may or may not know themselves very well. And you may or may not know yourself very well. And then you're trying to mesh these two people, these two humans, which are highly complex organisms and have their own history and their own experience, and trying to mesh them together in a productive way where both people get value and don't feel worse after the interaction. So it's like that's a lot of energy, and it's almost like you have to pick and choose where you want to put the energy, right? And so even to people listening to this, like, pause this for a sec, and as kind of a couple little experiments, write down, what does the word relationship mean to you? Like, what comes to mind? How do you define relationship? And then also, like, what are the relationships you value most? And does that align with where you spend your energy, right? Like, if you say my relationship to my kids matters most, but you spend very little time and energy on that relationship, maybe there's a mismatch there, a misalignment that might be contributing to a sense of uneasiness or unhappiness maybe. And it's not until we really, like, everything starts with awareness, and the awareness part can be really uncomfortable because what you're not aware of, if you're not aware of something, then it takes energy to become aware of something you aren't aware of, right? And so I think we only become aware of these things in relationship to others, yep. Right? Like, how else, blind spots are blind spots for a reason, because we don't know we have them. And the only way you figure those out is in relation to other people who maybe bring out those blind spots or inform us of our blind spots, which is uncomfortable, right? Like, it's never fun to be told about one of our blind spots, and oftentimes we don't fully acknowledge that they exist. We kind of, I know I've been guilty of this. You kind of like blame, you say, oh, that's just that person thinking something, but it's not true. And so really I like what you said there, and it's kind of screwing up my entire mental model of relationship, because we only develop a better relationship with ourselves through others, through other things, and mostly other people. Yeah, very interesting. It's like health is all about relationships.
Yeah, it is. And I would also say that, like, when we talk about blind spots, I'm finding now in my life that it's easier to deal with, it's easier to see your blind spots spontaneously when you put yourself in diverse situations, because then that's what I mean by stimulates natural curiosity. Like, I always think, oh, I'm a pretty good communicator. I can talk to anybody. But when I was with this group of young people, I was like, my 50-year-old lingo is not gelling. I mean, and it wasn't like it was ever a bad thing, It was just like, oh my God, we're so different. But we had rollerblades on, like, we all had rollerblades on, and we had this.
That was the commonality.
that was the commonality, but that's also, I'm an advocate for doing things together, right? Like we have the privilege of language, and language has so much power in it. You know, we've talked a lot about like letting people tell you about your blind spots. You don't need to be told about your blind spot when you put yourself in a group of people who are 20 years younger than you. They are obvious.
Yeah, reality tells you those blind spots.
Yeah. And I think it's so cool because like there was a part of me that I was like, get me the F out of here right now. I just want to go home I want to go back to my little skate area. And I went back and forth like 3 times. I was like, Matthew, I don't think I want to go with them. You know, they're going to go fast. And I don't know, they're wearing fishnet stockings. And I don't know, this feels weird. We were like in all of our all of our protective gear. And they were like, zoom, zoom, flying over things. But they were so sweet, Nick, because they were like bridging the gap and they're like, you should come with us, you know, come with us. So we were like, okay, we're going. And it was so exhilarating and uncomfortable. And the blind spot for me was like, well, I don't speak very well to 20-year-olds, you know. I'm lame. I say the same shit, and this is just what goes on in my head. It's not true. They were sweet, but I'm out of practice, like you were saying. You gotta practice being in the game. And this has been happening with me with like younger people for a while, where it's like, oh, I feel so young, and then you go and you're like, oh my God, they're like little tiny embryos compared to me, you know, and they have so much to teach, you know, like, oh, that's the one thing where I'm having trouble with my own relationships and my family. It's like I'm in my 50s, my parents are in their 70s, and they think they're so smart. It's like we have so much to learn from people younger than us, you know. We don't know hardly anything. And then we also have things to learn from people who are older than us. And we also have things to teach people. Like we're practicing becoming, in my age group, I'm practicing trying to become like a solid, reliable person that somebody younger than me could possibly depend on if they need it, you know, for experience or advice or something. But I don't need to go out just giving it, you know, because I'm a relic.
If you say you are, then
Then
you're
you
gonna
are.
act like one. But
no, but
I don't think you're
I think
Ruth.
no, but that's when you're like, oh, it's a little over the top, but it's like I am shown the comparison, like I'm not 20. This is like, and it's so refreshing to see people fresh on the planet and without unencumbered by certain burdens that we tend to carry with us as we get older. We just carry our little black bag with us, you know, just stuffing shit in there all the time. Like, I'm gonna carry this with me.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta just ditch the bag.
Yeah.
One thing that we talked about a couple of days ago that kind of stuck with me was this whole idea that, you know, if you see two humans interacting on the street, and you eavesdrop and you hear what they're saying or how they're interacting with one another, you can kind of get a sense as to like, is that a good relationship or not a good relationship, right? Like two people, they're smiling, they're talking, they're hugging, whatever. You're like, oh, they have a good relationship. Two people arguing, yelling at each other. One person is just like, you're terrible. How could you do this? You're like, oh, that's a rough relationship. And if we take that and we think about how we talk to ourselves, and we pull out the conversations we have with ourselves and put it into like a simulation of two people, right? How many of us would be the person who's just shitting on the other person, be like, how the heck could you know you're not supposed to do that? Why did you do it? You're terrible. You're so unhealthy, you know? And it's like, how can we, like, we know how to identify it with other people, but we fail to identify it in ourselves. And I think it would do us, me included, a lot of benefit to really take time to examine what is the relationship I have with myself. Have I ever even thought of that? Have I ever tuned into my own experience to detect the times that I'm being that shitty relationship person? And you know, blaming or shaming or holding resentment or all these things. And I think it really, I don't know, that for me was like a really big one because it made me want to tune in more to the conversations I have with myself and have conversations with other people about the conversations we have with ourselves, which is
Yeah.
risky, right? Like
Yeah.
I heard the word once, someone said intimacy is into me see. Intimacy is letting someone
Oh
else
yeah.
see inside of you, which is
Yeah.
super scary because some people are scared of even looking inside themselves. And yeah, just
Yeah.
this idea that we think about relationships oftentimes as visualizing a relationship between two people. But I think spending more time thinking about the relationship we have with ourselves and putting, like not judging the relationship we have with ourselves, but putting a magnifying glass on it and being that curious 5-year-old that everything is like, ooh, that's interesting, right? It's not good or
Yeah.
bad. It's just,
Yeah.
that's interesting. And maybe helping develop that self-awareness by being more curious to really see it from like a non-judgmental third person point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Compassion is a word that comes to mind there, which I'm learning. Like, I mean, I've been honest in these lessons, like when I say things like, oh, I'm a relic, like those are that's the kind of dialogue I have in
Mm.
my head with myself, almost subconsciously when I'm faced with discomfort of certain things, right? Like being exposed, like I realize how little I expose myself. And this is one of the reasons why I really loved teaching in college, is that you were constantly coming into contact with the world around you in the way of like other professors, older people, you know, different kinds of bureaucratic people, and then the young people, and everybody was together. And if you could stay self-aware, that could be a really nourishing environment. But since I haven't been in that environment as much and my work has gone largely online, um, I only I have to purposefully seek out those places of non-commodified public appearance in order to play. I mean, like it's playful, but it also is uncomfortable. And I see, like you've pointed out, even just in this lesson, I've said like 3 different things to you out loud that go on inside me that are like, well, is that really compassionate? Like your cells are listening. Your 70 trillion molecular geniuses that we call cells are taking instructions from us at all times. Like our bodies are designed to receive instructions. And just like you said, well, if you keep telling yourself you're a relic, then you're going to start, your cells are going to be like, she's a relic. She's a relic.
Let's pack it in. We're relics. Yeah, I mean, these oftentimes the most profound insights I have, or sometimes the realizations of things that are incredibly important for health, are trying to make sense of the hardest things to explain and explore.
Yeah.
Like community is a really hard one, right? We know community, like we see a group of people, oh, that's a community. But like actually exploring, what does community even mean? How do I cultivate? Because in order to cultivate community and improve our community pillar, even to know what the word improve means in that context, we have to know like what the heck is that, right? And what is at a zoomed out level, what does a poor relationship with the pillar of community look like? What does a good relationship look like? How do I improve my relationship with community? And I think like 2 variables that come to mind when I think of relationship and community, because I think they're deeply interlinked, is the breadth of my relationships. So how many relationships do I have with people, with things, with nature, and the depth. So if I take, the quantity of relationships I have, if we are alone, that kind of insinuates that we don't have very many relationships. And to increase the number of relationships requires a motivation to go out into the world and build new relationships, right? To go into that public space that's jammed with people and be open enough to taking the risk of meeting someone and not being afraid they're going to judge us, or not being afraid that something bad's going to happen. So like breadth of relationships equals quantity of different relationships. And then also depth, like, so if you're lonely, maybe you don't have enough relationships, or maybe you don't have deep enough relationships with the people you have relationships with, right? And so just,
or some combination of both, right?
or so, and it's probably some combination of both, but for sure. And what are areas that, if you want to eat better food, maybe it's not just a matter of like buying organic. Maybe it's like, maybe I need to deepen my relationship with food. Maybe I need to grow something that I eat, or watch something grow. I have to take care of something that I can consume, right? That's like that specific relationship with food. If you zone into the food area of relationships, expand the amount of relationships you have within that context, and then deepen some of them where you're putting more energy into building better relationships. And I
Yeah.
think I've always thought of that. If someone said that, put more energy into building better relationships, I would think, oh yeah, I'll spend more time with my partner or with my family. But I think it's so much more broadly applicable now that I
Yeah.
think this is just coming from this conversation. It's like a totally different way of thinking about relationship.
Yeah. And I am always advocating for myself for doing the thing that feels the easiest.
I think it's a human tendency.
Yeah, it's
You're
like
not
we just,
alone.
where it doesn't take so much effort. And the one thing that it always comes back to, right, is that like you could just be around other people on a bus. If I mean, like you could be on the bus or on a train, and you don't even have to. I guess my point here is like take the earbuds out, leave the phone off, away, give yourself the luxury, because I kind of hear people saying like, well, I'm an introvert, and I'm kind of introverted in certain situations too. Like I don't always want to be like talking to people and being outgoing and like developing new relationships. It's like you said, they're hard. I'm out of practice, and really I get pissed a lot, you know. Um, because I'm too comfortable in my righteousness about my own life and my ideas and my belief systems. And that is the truth about so many of us, is that we
Mm.
think we know shit.
Yeah, we're rigid. We're too certain about
Yes.
things.
Yes. Oh,
And then
I
when something
feel,
shakes our certainty, we're like, no, they're wrong. They're wrong.
yeah. But it could be as easy as just ditching your phone, ditching your earbuds, and taking a walk in a public place or sitting on a bench and letting life wash over you, watching children and dogs and people in the park, watching the birds. And then maybe by chance, a brief interaction, a smile. I can't tell you how many people I walk past on the street where I say hello, they can't hear me because they have those little white earbuds in.
Yeah, they're
Or,
unavailable even. So it's like
yeah,
almost by putting the phone away, by taking the earbuds out, you simply make yourself available to potential relationships.
which
Not
is
necessarily
also,
saying, yeah,
yeah, and vulnerable, right? It's not
yeah.
comfortable. But a smile, just making eye contact, that
Mm.
is a relationship. And I mean, like the conclusion of my whole idea when we were creating this is like, well, what does this have to do with health? Like, really, like, so we talked about relational diversity and relational nutrients, the wider variety, the richer dimensional quality and texture and richness you have in your life. Like, you're not subsisting on Doritos and French fries. But also, your that trickles out into the ecosystem around you. We naturally make the world a richer, more healthy place to be just by doing that,
Yeah.
just by being in the place of public appearance together with other humans. You don't even have to do anything. Like life will find us, like I think it's like Franz Kafka talks about, you don't even have, you just have to sit, like life will unveil itself to you naturally. And
If
you
you
will
make
have
yourself available
if
to
you
it.
make yourself available, and you will have opportunities. And it doesn't like I think you're talking about in your notes, like breadth and depth. A variety doesn't, like maybe you have two deep relationships that you're nourishing, and then you go to the grocery store instead of buying something online, or you actually exchange money instead of swiping your card. Maybe like your hand actually brushes another person's hand. What the hell would that be like?
Yeah, it's like sometimes I think of it as like an odds game, right? If I'm in my house, not around anyone else, the odds of meeting a stranger and having a great interaction are zero. Because
Yeah.
unless someone's breaking into my house, in that case, it's probably not going to be a great relationship. But the idea that, if I'm walking around all day or for a lot of time each day with no headphones, um, being curious and observant and willing to engage with people, making eye contact, smiling, saying hi, seeking out opportunities to say, like, how's your day? You're literally generating a higher it's just way more odds of having good relationships blossom out of nowhere,
Yeah.
right? And it's like
You
One of my
have that
favorite.
happen. You have that happen a lot because you create time and space, from what I know about you, where you can go on a walk and end up having an hour-long conversation with somebody you just met, right?
Yeah, and like those are some of the best like so lately I went from this thing where it's like I want to include the excluded. I want to have conversations with all the homeless people in my neighborhood because I see them all. I want to know their name. I want to know one thing about them. So I went from like just saying hi and then saying hi and saying their name to actually being like, instead of just walking, like there's this guy, Paul, he's got this awesome dog and he's always on this main strip. And I would usually just say, hi, Paul. Like I got to the point where I knew his name, I knew his dog's name, Kiro, and I would say hi to them. But the other day, I was like, I have nowhere to be. And I just sat down on the bench beside him and we talked for like an hour. He loves to water ski. He's like, if I ever found some money, we should go water skiing together. And we were just we just had a random conversation. I talked to him for about an hour, and I was like, that's the best conversation I may have had in like a month, right? Because he had nowhere to be. He wasn't looking at his phone. He didn't have a meeting to go to. I didn't either. We were just curious about each other's lives, and like, who would have thought, right? Like most people ignore him. Some people are nasty. He was just telling me about the different dynamics of the people he sees. He's like, the people who are the nastiest to me have the hardest lives. So I just try and smile at them because they're having a hard time. This is from a guy that doesn't even have a home and he has a problem with alcohol and, like all these things. But the idea of being open and available, of not jamming so many things into our lives that we become unavailable to, like I remember having a conversation with a girl once and she lives around here. She's like, yeah, it's so hard to, dating's really hard. It's hard to find people. I'm like, well, how much time do you go out there searching? She's like, well, I search on Tinder. I'm like, you really think you're going to find the best people on Tinder? Like, what about going for walks and just chatting with random people? And it's funny how people say, I feel lonely, but they, at the same time, they give themselves no opportunity to actually build relationships. And I've definitely been guilty of that in the past as well. So I think just the openness and the willingness to engage, interact, put ourselves in situations where there might be something that happens like spontaneously. If you're not open to it, it's not going to happen. If you're walking around with headphones and you're like, oh, I never talk to anyone. It's like, well, you're not even available to speak. No one knows. You're not extending any invites. So no one's inviting you. Mm-hmm. And it's just funny how, what can start with seemingly simple things like, how's your day? Like, I love asking people that. How's your day going? Sometimes opens the door to really rich conversations out of nowhere, right? And if you ask that enough times, it's like if you ask that to one person, maybe they'll just say good. If you ask that to 10 people, maybe 1 out of 10 of those people will be like, oh, this happened today, or I'm doing this tomorrow. It's like, you have to bring your odds up, right? All I try and do these days is like, how do I maximize my odds of being able to expand the amount of relationships I have and deepen the relationships that I already sort of have in place, right? Instead of it goes from very few relationships to more relationships, although they might be superficial, and then trying to pick the superficial ones and then going deeper with them. And it's, I learn a lot about myself from those conversations. Like every time I speak to people in the homeless community around here, I learn a lot about myself, not just them, but like they'll share their perspective on the world. I'm like, wow, I'm thinking of the world in a much more limiting way, or about like how I think of money, how I think of work, and their perspective is so fresh and new that it's like, wow, I got some stuff to work with now because I got to almost integrate this with my former self. Like the Nick before having the conversation with Paul is a totally different Nick than post Paul conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think it's easy to stagnate because we're not actually being open enough to changing ourselves. Right, back to that rigidity thing. If we're real rigid, we don't want to give ourselves any reasons to have to change, which means we don't want to interact with anyone that's different or challenges us or thinks differently. So I think just the openness to being able to change and the willingness to create opportunities to form new relationships or deepen relationships, it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, and it depends how you look at it, right? But I think fundamentally, people just, the crutch I hear a lot of people say is, I don't have time. I don't have time to go on walks. I don't have time to just not care what time it is. I have meetings, I have this and that. It's like, well, you have no opportunities to build relationships. So it's hard to complain about being lonely when you're doing everything you can to stay lonely.
Yeah. And then like what, like if you don't have time, what do you what are you spending your time doing? You're probably working with somebody at some point. So how
Right.
can you nourish the relationships that you're in, that you see? I mean, it seems to me like, with, again, back to like our modern conveniences and all of the tools of comfort that we have in our life, every human almost, and the natural world around us, becomes an obstacle to getting to like the place we want to be, or
Yep.
and so work is that way too. Like we tend to maybe overwork or not see work as something that we want to be doing. So the people we work with are obstacles to getting home to Netflix, or I don't know what
Yeah,
people
yeah,
do at
that's a
night.
good
But
point.
like, I don't know that I don't maybe Netflix is like so cliche. Maybe people are getting out and trying to do things and interact, but like, that doesn't take away, like, we drive. I mean, I've been seeing some weird phenomenon lately. Like, I'll walk and I see people in the city. So I'm in Tampa. I see people parked on the side of the street with their cars idling because it's hot out, with the air conditioning running, and they're sleeping. They're like taking a nap in the middle of the day.
Hmm.
And I don't know why that brings to mind, just like, we are so isolated, like, these, I've seen more
They're
than one
literally in a
per
pod by
they're in a
themselves.
pod by themselves, sleeping in public, because maybe they haven't created the opportunity to go home. But I see this as like maybe people who are working on their lunch break, and that can be fun, but so then you see like the people you work with as like, your coworkers, but obstacles to getting to where you want to be. We've become obstacles to each other.
Yeah.
You drive in a pod, a 2,000-pound pod, and every other person on the road becomes an obstacle to where we need or want to be. um
Well, think even like I think of the past 2 years in Canada and this idea that we've been the majority of people have been programmed to think that other people are threats.
right.
Like social distancing is the craziest term ever. Like it's pretty sad to really like take a step back and away from the hysteria of everything and be like, wow, we just systematically disassembled health by disrupting all relationships between humans
Yeah.
under the guise of it's what we need to do to be healthy
Right.
by the people who understand health none at all.
Right.
um
you
yeah,
know
it's just really, it's like, I mean, it's a big opportunity though, right? Like instead of
right.
getting into doom and gloom mode, it's like, well, we have a lot of healing to do, we have a lot
Yep.
of relationship rebuilding and re-nourishing to do.
Hmm.
So how do we do that? How do we get how do we get to work basically and
Yep.
enjoy
Yep.
the, and not just work, but like how do we enjoy the process of rekindling relationships and trust with one another?
Yep.
um, and I think a big part of what we can do at the Foot Collective in future is create opportunities for connection. That's really like, we're not going to make two people have a great relationship. We can't force that. But what we can do is create a container, an environment, an occasion that's very conducive to having people feel that it's a safe environment to play with another human, physical play where they're actually touching each other, um, or where they're having to do something risky, right? They're not afraid of, am I going to look silly by doing this?
Yeah.
Like really creating an atmosphere of comfort and safety where people can go outside. They can kind of come outside their shell, right? It's like the hermit
Right.
crabs where they never want to get out of their shells and they go into this space and it's like, there's no predators here. You can all be without a shell. No one's going to eat you. So it's okay. You can put your shell back on when you leave if you want. But hopefully this makes you more comfortable being without a shell more frequently. But I think that's what we need. And I think that's kind of what we've lost. And this is what ties into the whole concept of a community center, is really just a place to facilitate connection where people know if I go there, it's going to be other people who also want to go and connect with people. And I think that's kind of what we need, right? Like we
Yeah.
don't even like shopping, right? You used to have to go into a store, speak to another human, potentially brush by other humans. Now you don't have to
Yep.
do that. You just literally just have to have one relationship with your computer. Your
Yep.
computer brings you all these things. And it'd be one thing if we did that and it allowed us to spend more time on other relationships. But I think the
Well,
asymmetry of technology, how it just grabs us so easily,
yeah. Yeah.
is taking away, the sense of not having enough time. It's like, I don't think people actually tune into where they spend their time and attention, because if they did, they'd probably see I spent a lot of time with technology.
Yeah. And your idea about the community center, I think the community center is the idea of the new town square.
Hmm.
So we lived in France for 2 years, and I loved, and the rhythm of the city was people kind of live by tradition there. So you'd go out into the square. Every city has multiple squares where there's people outdoors, there's music, there's food, there's people just walking back and forth, doing things, shopping, and and there's all different ages, children, old people, so it seems like the community center is almost like could be the new town square, where you combine all the different ages, all the different people, all the different socioeconomic factors. There's opportunities there to interact, and I love the idea of the community center, Nick.
Yes, me too. Well, we've been talking for an hour, so
Well,
that goes
so
by
much for
quick.
the 40-minute stuff.
That's all right.
Experiments?
So yeah, I mean, we had all these more like nuts and bolts. How do you define healthy versus unhealthy relationship? All these kind of things to talk about. But I think the conversation we just had is actually way better, because it was really just us sharing our perspective and almost thinking out loud of how we think of relationship. And I'm going to listen to this one again, because during this conversation, my way of thinking of relationship and how that fits into like the way I think about the world changed a lot. So is there anything you want to say before we close this one out? Maybe, I guess a suggestion for an experiment for me is go out and try and create more opportunities to build broader relationships, and maybe pick one relationship you already have and inject more energy into it to go a little bit deeper, which often is scary, right? Like intimacy is scary. And, like we used to do this exercise, you and I together, where it's like, if you really knew me, you'd know that. And it was something that very few people would know, because it's something that is scarier to share, right? That leaves you open to judgment. And so I think it's like a reciprocal thing, right? Like the way you build an intimate relationship, in terms of my understanding, is like you put out some good faith into being a bit more vulnerable, hoping that the other person won't judge you or attack you. And the other person recognizes that and says, okay, it's safer to go a little bit. It's safer to take more risk, right? They took a risk. I'm going to take a risk. And that reciprocity of taking more risks, of feeling safer, of not feeling judged, allows you to go pretty deep. And I think when you actually have someone that you can explore yourself and help them explore themselves at a really deep level, there's something very powerful about that. But I think we have less and less of it these days, once again, because it's almost like when I text someone or hear about someone's life over text, it removes the reason for me to go talk to them in person. And it's easy to think that text message, or that sequence of text, or that quick 5-minute call gives me the nutrients that I would have gotten by spending a half an hour with that person. But I don't think that's actually true. I think technological hyperconnection is the junk food of relationship nutrients. So I'm trying to take my own advice and be, it's funny how once you just get rid of the tech, and when you stop messaging, I've noticed this in my life. I think I heard Rangan Chatterjee talk about it. Once you stop connecting with people digitally, you automatically develop a hunger and a desire to connect with people in real life. It's like not even like you have to force it. It's just if I stop the tech connection, if I do email less and text less and all that kind of stuff, I automatically just crave connection. And if I don't have the tech on me, I'm going to do it in person. And so I think maybe that's a good experiment. It's just like remove the technological connection and communicate to people you connect with technologically that, how about we meet up in person today instead of calling, or instead of doing a text message?
Yeah, I second the experiment about going out into the world without anything to listen to or anything to look at technology wise. Leave it at home. So that would go to a public place, and just be there, grab a coffee or tea or something, and just be in the place of public spaces. If you have
And be
that,
open.
if you have that around you. And then the other experiment I had was taking a relationship inventory, like in your health log, write down like who are the people that you interact with on a regular basis. Like you kind of went through like There's maybe a couple of people that you are intimate with. Your relationship, take an inventory of the quality and the quantity of your relationships and how much time you spend where. And then I can't, my most important lesson in all of this is actually like doing activities. So maybe think about something that makes you uncomfortable that you wanted to always do. Maybe you think that dialogue in your head with yourself is like, I'm not creative, I'll never be able to paint anything in my life, I'm crappy, I'm
People
not
won't
creative.
like me.
And go enroll yourself in a paint class.
Yeah.
And do something you've never tried before that you want to do, but go there and be with other people physically and do that thing. Or start your own meetup. Like, let's say you want to play on your rollerblades or something. Put a Facebook page together, encourage people to meet you and go do something together. Like, do something, because that's the most natural way, natural learning. We are natural learners. We innately learn if we give ourselves the right inputs. And I'm fiercely advocating for doing things with your body, with your hands. Sing, play an instrument, do something. Take your balance beam to the park and invite other people to join you. Do something, and maybe that you've never tried before, and then take notes on how you felt discomfort or how you felt elated or what your strengths and your weaknesses were in that interaction.
Great experiment. I just thought of something. I just want to mention it. One of the most intense experiences I've had was at a conference I went to, and they did an eye gazing session. Dude,
the worst.
That is so intense. And it's like, and that stuck with me. I was like, why was that so intense? And all I did was sit in front of another man for 5 minutes, and we stared in each other's eyes. Nothing was said. And I learned more in that 5 minutes about myself. And it's a very interesting, if you're really brave, you want to try it someone you have an intimate relationship with and see, like, without laughing, without saying any words, because we put words in there to fill the awkwardness.
Yeah.
And it's very, very interesting. And nothing was said, right? Like, no words were exchanged. Nothing was done. All we did was look at each other. And I got a whole lot of communication from myself, and I felt like from the other person. So things like that. Try things that
was good.
And like, at the time it was really uncomfortable, but afterwards it was like, I felt really good after. I was like, I needed that.
Talk about into me see, literally.
Yeah, that's what first went through my head. I'm like, this guy can see in my soul right now. I wonder what he's seeing.
I'd be like,
yeah. And even eye contact. Like, I noticed, so I've started to wear sunglasses only in the afternoon if it's really sunny. But I've tried to not wear them because, number one, it is the headphones of the eyes. Yes. When you have sunglasses on, you are basically unavailable.
You're disguised. It's a mask.
Disguised, and you're blocking. Yeah. It's like, that's a block to other people engaging with you.
Yep.
And even just going out on a walk and every person you see making direct eye contact and not like laser beams where you're just staring at them, but like make eye contact, nod, say hi.
Yep.
One thing I've noticed is very few people are comfortable making eye contact.
Yeah.
So good experiment to try. It's like, count how many people are comfortable making eye contact without instantly shifting away, or even, so most people don't even look at you, which I find very interesting.
Yeah. Nick, I've been in my partnership with Matthew for 18 years. We've been married for 14. I tried that eye gazing. That shit is hard. I was like, oh my God, he's going to know I ate his chocolate. Oh my God.
There's chocolate on your lip. Oh, that's great. Anyway, nerds, we hope, this is a different lesson style. We had a whole framework set up and then we just didn't look at it. But we need your feedback to let us know if you liked this format, if you prefer the more sequenced, organized format. So please let us know on Slack. We don't know. It's like same thing. It's like, we don't know how to get better if no one tells us or tells us what they like. We have these conversations all the time. We just happen to record some of them. That's kind of how I think of it. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking responsibility for your health and being part of this badass global community of foot nerds. I think, the hope is that we find more opportunities in future to connect in person with other nerds. And I think that just requires energy. The past couple of years, I don't know if many people had spare energy, but hopefully that changes and we have more of a surplus. And maybe if more of us take an interest in wanting to put out the effort and can actually travel to meet up with each other. I think, anytime I've met up with nerds before, BC before COVID at seminars and workshops, it's always been an amazing experience. Go out for a meal, whatever it might be. So looking forward to more of that. And thanks for being here, and we'll catch you in the next conversation.
Ciao for now, nerds. Love ya.